Okay, we'll get going here. It is my great pleasure to introduce Michael Lewis. Before, Michael is a professor in the medical school. He has multiple appointments in the university. He's one of the most eminent psychologists in the country. And I could go through the long list of his accomplishments, but I think we'd be better to let him give a talk. But he's going to be talking about emotional development and psychology. He's been one of the great contributors to child development, literature, and research. And so Michael will do a short talk. Thank you.
Well, just so you know, yeah, the numbers, having a formal lecture is probably more than we both can do in the sense of digestion and mental operations. And in a certain way, it's sort of folk idea that the blood rushes from your head into your stomach to digest it. I don't think that. But it's actually an interesting study to see whether how much is absorbed or how much is as you eat. Certainly, eating is satisfying the need. Do you learn better when you're hungry or when you're not? Now, clearly, very hungry. That's a different story. I don't know. I don't even know if there are any studies on it. But it would be interesting to see how much attention. So I'm going to talk for a while. I'm going to talk on the general subject of emotion development and pathologies associated. And I'm going to talk about children, some about infants, some about children. I've been interested in emotional development for a very long time. I'm approaching 60 years from when I got my dissertation. So I'm what you would call an old man. I'm actually there are three kinds of old. And then there's old, and then there's old. And I'm just getting shy of the old ones. I passed two olds. And indeed, I can get in for half price in New York City public transportation system. In that regard, it's kind of interesting because, and here's a study I would like. When I come on the subway, a car, and it's full, and people will sometimes give up this. And I find that a little disconcerting because I don't mind being old. I think I'm a young but not all the time. Certain subway lines, you're more apt to find people giving up this. And there may well be gender as well as culture. Nobody has really studied that. What triggers empathic behavior as measured by giving up yourself. But I want to talk about emotions. To do so takes us into a heady conversation because, and I'm going to talk from this book, which is called The Rise of Consciousness and the Development of Emotional Life. Books become old very quickly. And I want to argue, as I do to my medical colleagues, rather than what characterized faces. They weren't human in any way. They were representative of some point that theologians wanted to make about a Christian art. Indeed, at this time in Islam art, there were no representations following the Hebrew tradition of not making images. So it's really Western where there's stylization. And if you go and look at Buddha and Buddhism, again you find you find stylistic. All of a sudden, somewhere in what's called the Renaissance, suddenly the idea was that you could depict human beings in human form. The interesting thing is, you kept to the idea that it was somber art in the Renaissance. That is, the art looked like this. It turned out the varnish had gotten heavy, and it made it not very colorful. Of course, the general regions were painted over as part of the painting is really this. It was clean. It was actually supported by the Japanese, a major Japanese company, who cleaned the Sistine Chapel, cleaned much of the art, and lo and behold, underneath it is in fact colorful. So the idea of non-emotional, somber, was ever present, when in fact the Renaissance was very colorful. The Renaissance rebirth goes back to the Greek and Roman. And of course, I'm sure you're all aware that the Greek and Roman statues and art were colorful. They were all painted. They weren't white and somber. So the first thing is that we have a conflict in Western art and culture between the somber and the colorful. If you'd like, between something emotional and something without emotion, something about ideas. This is the culture it's in the Old Testament, which is accepted in most religions as the story not only of Western, but the story of creation. So it holds some importance as the story of creation. The importance, of course, for in Christianity is that it represents original sin. The eating of the apple is original sin, and it takes it took a long time, and with the advent of Jesus to clear us of this. So, as you remember, and I've actually been writing a paper on what the Genesis is really says, because it looked to me before I read the King James version, which is nothing like the original Hebrew that was translated into Greek and eventually into Roman and so on. Now, fundamentally, the story is very simple. And to sort of rephrase it, they're sort of enjoying themselves in the Garden of Eden. We're going to forget about if Adam came first or Eve, because the story actually in the Old Testament, there are two stories of creation, and they really don't agree. And that's why when it became part of Christian religion, it in fact got sort of cleaned up into one story. It accepted the idea that Adam was made from Eve, therefore she is part. But it also made the point that women are more susceptible and are likely to tempt men and to do bad things. But the important thing is really the emotion as expressed in the Old Testament. And the emotion goes around like this. It says there are two things you can't do. You can't eat of the tree of life, and you can't eat of the tree of knowledge. Okay? So God wants Adam and Eve essentially to be pretty dumb, but happy in the garden, in paradise. Okay? So, and he warns them, if you eat of the tree of knowledge, and then eat of the tree of life, you will become as gods, and you're going to surely die. And that's the admonition. And it also says they were naked and not ashamed. Lo and behold, they eat of the tree of knowledge, they eat the apple, and they gain knowledge. Now, what is very dramatic about it is that the only emotion discussed when they eat of knowledge is shame. They are ashamed of their nakedness. They hide from God. God knows they've eaten of the tree of knowledge, and he kicks them out of paradise. And this is the scene of the expulsion. And actually, is in fact one of shame, which we could talk more about. So it's actually a very interesting model explaining how self-conscious emotions such as shame or embarrassment or guilt come into being. And the theme is it comes into being, and I'm going to make this a developmental theme, it comes into being because something happens. And I also want to make use of the idea that throughout this story, God is threatening them with dying. Yet when he kicks them out for not doing what they should, he doesn't kill them. But they come to know with knowledge that they are and that they will die. That is, I'm going to argue, this is really a story not of original sin, but of the development of consciousness. That somewhere in the development of the child, some magical moment, consciousness emerges. Namely, this is me, so you have language, me or mine or I, which we know when it develops. We have symbolic play, which is not imitation. Piaget talks about it, Morin talks about it in her play. But something very interesting happens. And the third thing that happens is, in fact, something that I've introduced and spent a lot of work on. So I've schematized it for you. It's very hard to it's still selling well, so it's been around a long time. It was an attempt to introduce into the developmental model of how emotional development might take place. So that actually happened. I want to talk about that because those are really very, very interesting, very controversial, and I think very important from an educational point of view. These are very early kinds of things. Why do I want to talk about it? Because when you pick up a baby, you take a 3 or 4 baby, and you toss it in the air. Some of them, just alone, they have basically looking up these thoughts. Conclude that they're happy and that they're both of these things happen. And how are we going to explain how a 3-4-month-old infant, to say nothing about our dogs, our cats, our plants, we attribute emotional life to all of these? And I'm going to try to argue for you is one piece of what I want to talk about. that these are action patterns. I want to talk a little about action patterns. So that's going to be one part. The second part is the second year of life, 15 to 18. Something in consciousness emerges. That the child now owns things. It recognizes itself that it has something. At 2 years of age, for example, the child can pick out what it drew versus what another child drew. That is, the child has some knowledge about itself, and people have talked about this as when the idea of possession comes into play. The third thing that happened, and one of the pathologies of it, the third thing emotional behavior emerges. That is, true emotional behavior can only emerge when these two things are combined. And I'm going to talk about jealousy, and I'm going to talk about individual differences in them. Then later, the evaluative emotions emerge. And those are guilt, shame, and pride, and evaluative embarrassment. And those can't occur until certain cognitive capacity. And I'm going to talk about the cognitive things that are necessary for these to occur. But in all cases, there are cognitive features that emerge that are important, but there are also differences in the action pattern and differences in consciousness that I want to speak to. So let me just turn quickly to a discussion of what are emotions. Now, we could spend the semester in talking about what are emotions. So I could ask you what are emotions, and for the most part, you would tell me about different emotions. And I must admit that my colleagues in studying this, there are many, many books, and I'm giving you one view. There are other views. I want to argue that there's such a thing called innate action patterns. These are certain kinds of things that infants and very young children bring with them. They are part of the evolutionary adaptive behavior. And these, I put in quotes, are emotions because we believe, as the guardians and caregivers of these children, we really believe that they're showing fear when we toss them, if they show an expression, and are showing happiness and joy. And I'm going to argue those are action patterns, and they are temperamentally different, and they are not yet the emotion, because emotions require what is it? The individual's idea of itself, what is the self's knowledge of itself, and appreciation of the relation to particular context that form the basis of an evaluative and interpretive process. So I'm going to argue that emotions are really action patterns plus this evaluative. The action patterns, I'm going to suggest, are biological. They can be influenced by environment, but consciousness is also biological. That is, the brain has the capacity to make this, to develop this idea, but it involves a culture, because the evaluative process involves culture. It involves knowing something about what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. Let in a little more detail talk about action patterns. And here I try to be more specific. Responses to specific context. That is, we evolve. The biology evolves in context. Thus, the biology It's adaptive most times. And as natural selection teaches, some of these action patterns are shared by other species, and they are not learned. From our point of view, the role of culture sorry about that. So, let me just talk a bit about these action patterns. So, reflexes. Children are born with a whole set, we call them reflexes, but fundamentally what I'm saying is they are born with the capacity to swallow. They are born with the capacity to suck. They are born with the capacity, the rooting reflex is if they're hungry, you stroke their cheek, they turn in the direction. These are not anything that are learned. They are in fact basic bicycle. The same is true, but food, and the fact is your body is digesting. Your body has been signaled by a context, and certain biological processes are taking place. You don't learn that. In fact, you don't even know about it. So you're listening to me, I go, what? Your body is probably listening to, oh, there's some sugar in here. I gotta pump out some insulin. So fundamentally, what I'm arguing about these action patterns are whole sets of responses in children and in adults, which are not learned, which in fact we're born with because that's what our species have. And by the way, we share it with other species. Other mammals, in fact, have the same problem when they eat sugar. They have insulin being secreted. No one taught them that. In fact, you don't even know it. That's happening. So it's knowledge your body has. Your body has feeling, but you have no knowledge of it. That's very important. Okay? Because when we say the infant feels pain, what do we mean by it? And that's always feeling, always captures us. We mean that from a body point of view, there is an action pattern which, if we had that and were conscious, we would say, oh, I am fearful. The infant doesn't have it. His body or her body may show fearful responses in the same way that they show insulin secretion with, so if what we mean by feeling is that, but usually we mean more. When I'm saying I am feeling sad, it's very different than being sad. I'm feeling it. There's a wonderful book, and it's called Being in Pain or Feeling Pain. And the example of what I'm saying is you go to your dentist, and it says I'm going to do some horrible things in your mouth, and she gives you a shot of Novocaine, and she says, do you feel pain? And you said, no, I don't feel pain. Are you in pain? If you looked at pain receptors firing, it's firing. You just don't have any knowledge of it. In the same way you don't have any knowledge of insulin. So be careful with the word feel, because all of these reflexes that child is engaged in the world with, but and the body may feel pain or may show behaviors that we would interpret as fear or joy. It's bodily, it is not a mental. But we don't believe that. When our baby cries, we say the baby feels pain or feels sad, not being held. So we are giving our interpretation to the behavior. But as I just give you in pain, it's not, that, uh, pain is when you have Novocaine, you don't feel it. Your body feels it, okay? But you don't feel it. That's the secret. Okay, now, but it's not as simple as that. These action patterns turn out to be very complex. So look at this. Okay. Has a sense of numbers, not of 1, 2, 3, but the sense of quantity. So that given the choice of something desirous, and there are 2 of them, and given 4 of them, chicks and infants somehow go to the 4. So we know these are not numerosity, these numbers as in quantity. We know that even people prior to the culturation of numerosity, primitive, it's such a terrible word, non-technological cultures, in fact, have the notion of 1, 2, and 3, and many. That's their language that they have. It turns out that chicks seem to have it as well. The point I'm making is that I'm not just talking about reflexes. I'm talking about what we have learned in the last 50 years about development, which is namely that this is a very complicated machine. It evolved, and part of its evolution is its interpretive, evaluative capacity, which we deal with all the time in education. But there are other features that it comes with it, and in fact, there has been in the history of understanding of the development of many more of these action patterns, which are not intersensory integration. You go to a film, and the lip movement and the phonetic structure don't match temporally. Okay? Within 100 milliseconds, if they're off, we as adults in English, if we're English speakers, will detect that those are not simultaneous. There's evidence, think of that, the work and I published in Science 74, that 4-month-old infants have already learned, 1, recognizing the phonemes of the language they're immersed in, and 2, if the phoneme and mouth movement are off, they detect it. McGurk has gone on to do the McGurk effect or the McGurk quirk. Any of you know of it? Okay. So write down McGurk and go into your computers at some point and look at the McGurk effect. What is extraordinary is if you move your mouth to pronounce ba, and you hear ba, you experience the sound of ba. However, if you go fa, move your lip with a fa, there's some recognition there of the phenomena, and ba is what's on the tape, you hear fa. You hear a sound that doesn't exist. That is, the brain is so wired that as now you're not learning this, nobody is teaching you this. It is a cultural artifact. Non-children will respond in the first 4 or 5 months of life to social sounds, smiling, in the same way as sighted children. It's only afterwards that the visual information which they lack starts them on a somewhat similar path. So again, there is this basic processes, not learn. We can go on. Bitter taste. This is very interesting because here is an example, and there's some really wonderful. Newborns respond to a bitter taste. Put a drop of lemon on. They respond with almost a disgust-like face. Nose goes up, sending the lip up, showing the teeth, and the other response is a tongue out. Disgust is an action pattern. Children have it to begin with. It's adaptive because if you can't take something out of your mouth that doesn't smell or taste good, disgust is an expulsion act, and it gets rid of it. But you and I have moral disgust. We can see someone behaving so cruelly to another person that, in fact, when we view it, we actually show a disgust face. A newborn is not born with a moral disgust. It's born with disgust around specific. However, it turns out, and here's a culture coming in, and I think this is fascinating. If mom is eating foods that are high in bitter or high in spice, what would cause those children become used to it in fetus and show the same responses that a kid who's been fed from another cultural type. So you have culture entering in, which can alter, but it doesn't change the basic replay. Well, so what I'm going to argue is just this. Action patterns are only tendencies. They are not hard and fast, deeply wired and unchanging. Even these action patterns can be open to culture. Okay? So what I'm going to say is a happy face, a sad face, a disgust face, a fearful face. When children show these are action patterns. They are related to certain patterns. A fearful face is a withdrawal. It is associated with bodily withdrawal. Simply means I'm not approaching because I don't know what it is. A happy face is associated with body posture of moving forward. A disgust face with expelling. It turns out that an angry face happens to be, and again, if we go back to Darwin, who was very interested in that. Remember, his second book is on the emotions of animals and humans. He says man, but that's not human. These action patterns are not learned. You don't learn fear. The culture teaches you what to fear or what not to fear, but not fear itself. In other words, all the emotions that we have as part of species. What differs is situations that give rise to these patterns or interpretation of them, and how to behave, that is suppressing some of these action patterns. Clearly, we do that all the time. So this is very important. The argument being, but let me say in the second part that if you look at these action patterns that a child is born with, think of it as along a normal distribution. Some kids may be born with more fear action patterns and some with more happy action patterns or more sad. That is, if you're born with an action pattern, there's a distribution in the culture. That distribution turns out to be very important. But the second thing is that, so that's the second one. There are individual differences. child and they will laugh, and you can take them. Do it with adults, and you'll cry. Okay? Now, what I'm saying is that the distribution of these action patterns is like any other distribution. Our best bet is it fits on a normal distribution. There are going to be people too much and people too little and people just the right amount, which would be the norm. Now, I'm not going to give you a Schneer, and there were some people at Rutgers talked about. I'm not going to do that. Okay, I want to do this just because it's educational. I want to go to this. This is the one. Our considering of this action what's our culture has a history. So when I started as a graduate student, which is in 1959, we tended to believe in the Lockean idea of a blank tablet. Everything, our individual differences, everything was laid down by our interaction with the culture. And culturalists still have that view, have this very strong, and that's the extreme, a very strong point of view that everything we are grows out of our experience in the world. The argument I want is that fear doesn't grow out of our experience. How much fear, what frightens us, how we respond, all of those are cultural artifacts, but not fear. Nobody taught us when we're happy to smile. That's not taught. It's just an action pattern. So, our time, James still had his buzzing, massive confusion. He started to think about what might make humans, namely action patterns. But again, it was children weren't born with any capacity. By 1975, in 1962, so it's already years when the infancy interest took off. It took off in the early 60s, but by 1975, Estonian now titles it the confident infant. No longer is it truly buzzing massive confusion, but now it has confidence. This continues. So, have the scientist in the crib by 2009. It's no longer buzzing confusion. It's actually a little onboard computer. And that continues. Where now the idea of thoughts are even present. So the whole idea of theory of mind and false beliefs is now claimed to be demonstrated in how the infant behaves. Now, I think the fallacy in that is you might have behavior, but behavior doesn't have the same meaning. Okay? So I want you to know that it is not a problem which we only approach during talking about emotion. Okay. So consciousness. So I want to move it along because we don't have to stop on it. We don't have the time on really me. But I can get to some of these things. From a developmental point of view, this is one, indeed, mentalism is its earliest representation. It is a representation. It does not exist at birth. It derives from the maturation of the brain, and there is good evidence now to suggest that. Although there were theories that said consciousness arose from the child's interaction with its social environment, Cooley and Others, if you read them correctly, are we really believe in a maturational idea. Simple interaction with the machine is not going to give the machine consciousness. So, this representation is a cognitive representation. It is what occurs in the Old Testament as knowledge. So, but it's not only knowledge, it's I know, it's a meta-knowledge. I know. I remember. Now, just to show you that those don't have to be related, let's just look. First development. The infant has these, if you like, these actions. It knows something. It knows, right? If it's touched here and it happens to be hungry, the system knows to turn in that direction. So it has knowledge. We all understand now that the child is born with knowledge. I will argue that this meta represents, the true representation, I know, is in fact what I'm going to call conscious. And I'm going to describe it. The relationship between I know you know and I know is a heavy one. It's not subtle. Is it a separate process, or when I know, I also know that you know? The third one, which is of course the most powerful memory, is I know that you know that I know that I should stop talking. Okay? So there's a wonderful book by a professor of education in Scotland called Knox. It's a very old book. And it's a set of poems about these recursive I know, you know. Because I can give you a recursive, 3 or 4 recursiveness. I know, you know, I know, that you know. And I can make sense of it. We can make sense of it. That's the point. I like to say aging just to show that you can apply it to age. I know I don't know. Okay? And I sometimes have to ask my wife, what did we went out for dinner? Where did we go? Okay? She will say 1 or 2 words, and it all comes back. So it's not a memory, it's being able to produce it. Also, I do not know what you know, which is, although perspective taking is terribly important, we understand that I can only guess at your perspective. I don't really know for sure what you know. This is the one when you're now getting senile, which is, I don't know, I don't remember that I don't remember. But now you get to crazy kind of behavior. You get, in fact, to such things as paranoia. Look, I put my keys down and they're not there, and the only other person in this house is you, and what did you do with my keys? That is, I don't any longer remember. I don't remember. So this recursiveness, this representation of the self in relation to others and to things is fragile. It takes a while to be developed, and indeed, you start to lose it at the end of life. Right? So it's that. So for those of you who don't know the technique, we use 3 measures: personal pronoun, me, mine, I, as I've said. We also look at symbolic play, in which the pretend is not vis-a-vis me, the pretend is vis-a-vis another. So I can pick up the phone and pretend I am talking on the phone. That's imitation. And infants can do this very early, and children, for example, with autism, can do it as well. It's the ability to take the phone and put it in your doll's ear and pretend that the doll is listening. That's a complex, and indeed, that doesn't emerge, as does me or mine, until self-recognition in mirrors emerges. And let me just show you what that looks like. It's a technique which we developed. We put rouge on the child's nose. The child doesn't know it has rouge. We have the child look in the mirror. The child looks in the mirror. Bingo. Touches its nose. If you're going to do it, you do it immediately. And if you don't do it, you cannot teach the child. So, for example, you can't put rouge on your nose and say to the child, you see the rouge? And then put the child back. The child, yeah, put the child back, the child won't touch its nose. The mother can do it. You cannot get a child to do it. So it emerges, and I'll show you just another child to show you how, how it occurs. You can see the rouge is on the child's nose. Bingo. It's the reliability of the measure is very high. Well, it turns out to go with personal pronoun use. When you can do this, you also have me or mine. You don't have I because I appears almost a year after me and mine. I won't show you the absence, but I do want to show you this. So here are changes, and it's a developmental phenomenon. I've tried to get pediatricians to use it as a very simple measure because you can get it in a doctor's office in 15 seconds. And instead of trying a reflex or listening in the ears or the chest or the heart, which are worthless, they could try other techniques. If you don't do it by 24 months, it's time for a referral. Okay? If children don't either touch their nose or say by 2 years of age, some children have a lot of language and will say nose or and point to their noses. So this behavior emerges. It's highly related to personal pronoun use and pretend play. And in fact, we can rate children on it. And I could show you data which show that children who have it who are typically developing are very different than children who are developing atypically. And we use autism or attention deficit as children with these as contrasts. Just to show you, we started to look at brain regions, and indeed it turns out, although there's some frontal behavior, it turns out that is most correlated with touching the nose. So there's a high correlation between recognizing yourself in the mirror and the maturation. These are it's not only self-recognition, but so we have some data of brain maturation. So what I'm going to show you something since you've been so attentive. And I want to show you Coco. Any of you know who Coco is? Coco's a gorilla. Okay? Coco is a gorilla raised by Penny Patterson. Penny Patterson weighed 100 pounds. Coco weighs 300 pounds. Female gorilla. She lived with her. And Penny gave me, we now know that we are not the only creatures on this earth who have self-recognition and self-referential behavior. Here's an example of a higher order, other species who have this capacity. She didn't put rouge on Penny's nose. What she did was she gave Penny a mirror to look into. Oh no. Okay. So here's, this is not Penny. Gorilla. You'll notice that She's cleaning her teeth using the mirror. That already is a self-referential behavior. And what you're going to see, she's find something, and she then looks at it on the window, what she took out. No question that orangutans, gorillas, and chimpanzees have self-recognition. So, my friends, I tell you, when you go to the zoo and you're looking at these creatures, understand they're looking back at you. So, you're both looking at each other. Now, let me give you an idea. Okay, so monkeys can't do it. Great apes can do it. There is question mark of whether porpoises can do it. I've read every one of the papers, and it's unclear. There is a claim that elephants can do it, and who knows? I have no problem with the belief that there is a certain self-representation in primates. Not all primates, the monkeys, the newer monkeys, cannot do it. It's only the great apes that can do it. But there may be other animals. Porpoises and elephants have been suggested they can do it. Not strong evidence, but a reasonable hypothesis. But the question is, are there pathologies in this? We don't have a lot of time. So I'm going to, at the moment, I'm going to go back to the action patterns and tell you that there are pathologies in action patterns. That is to say, there are children who are born who are avoidant versus children, infants I'm talking about, who are non-avoidant. This is the experimental procedure. So we have a child in a situation, these are 3 or 4 months, where they're pulling a string to get a picture to be turned on. Typically, developing children can learn to do this in 3 or 4 minutes. That is, significantly increase their rate of arm pulling, even relative to the arm that is causing it, the picture to go on, relative to the arm that is not causing it. So you can hook up an experiment where there are 2 strings, and only one string is going to work to turn on the picture, and these very young infants can learn it. There are infants who cannot learn it, and there's our first indication that there's a distribution, and we should be watching out for these infants. There may be some pathologies in this action pattern. But the one that's more of interest to us is the when they learn it, we stop the machine delivering the reward, which are pictures of other infants. Pull a string, picture of an infant comes on. Infants love to look at infants, as adults like to look at infants, as animals like to look at human infants. Infancy is a very powerful phenomenon. The picture goes off. Any of you know anything about operant learning know there's something called a bump. There is an extinction bump. It means that when it stops reinforcing for a little while, most people continue to pull to try to get that picture back on. It turns out when that frustration occurs, you tend to see anger on their face, and they pull like crazy to try to get it back on. You're at a slot machine in Vegas, you're pulling the thing, you're putting your quarter in, you're pulling, and all of a sudden you put your quarter in and the thing doesn't pull. Well, you start to pull like crazy, okay? That's the bump until you give up. 85% of infants show an anger-like response when it doesn't work, and they pull like crazy. 15% give up immediately. One of your professors in the psych department and I did a study with mice. They ran down an alley and to get food, and they ran faster and faster as they learned the food was down there. All of a sudden, there's no food. 15% of those animals give up the first time they find no food. 85% show this bump. They keep trying to get it. It turns out in humans, when you look at these children at 2 or 3 years of age, these are all, what you find is the infants who gave up, or in fact, the infants who give up when you give them a hard task to do. So this persistence seems to be a dimension that has individual differences, and we suspect some pathology. By the way, the same thing goes out with mice. If you put them in a situation in which they have to swim to find an exit, the mice who gave up when there was no food at the end of the runway are the mice who give up and don't try to find their way out. So it seems to be a cross species, not particularly one. In self-recognition, there are also vast differences, which I'm going to try to start. Children with Down syndrome show self-recognition only if they have achieved a mental age of 15 to 18 months. Okay? So, one of the things we should know, if you don't touch your nose, there's a chance of some retardation. It's even more impressive with autism. 50% of kids with autism, the more serious involved, never touch their nose, never develop personal pronouns. And I'm not going to even go into their failure of subsequent emotional life, because we don't have time. But 50% do show it, but they don't show it until 6 to 8 years of age. And they're always handicapped. Even the Asperger, even the child who has a, if you like, normal IQ, ends up with the inability to take perspective of another. So the perspective of another, which is part of what occurs in the early self-recognition, later self-recognition people, although they achieve that, don't in fact achieve the skill that goes with it. We could go on, but we don't have the time. The first thing we look at, and now my ending sentence, we look at embarrassment, which is one of the earliest of the self-conscious emotions. And embarrassment is characterized by a smile, a looking away, nervous touching. It's embarrassment, and that embarrassment is totally related to whether you recognize yourself in the mirror. If you don't recognize yourself, you won't be embarrassed, because this embarrassment is an embarrassment due to being the object of others' attention. Darwin discussed it, although most people don't read enough to understand it. He said that people are embarrassed if they are the object of attention, not embarrassed because of right and wrong. That kind of embarrassment occurs a full year after this first time. So, I'll give you an example. I say I'm going to point to one of you, and it's going to be random. I'm closing my eyes and I just point to one of you. When I point to you, everyone looks at you. Would you be embarrassed? Yes, the answer is, I don't do it anymore, but I could demonstrate to you you'd be embarrassed. And if you've done nothing wrong, because I've randomly pointed to you. So it's called self-exposure embarrassment. When we play the game, we take kids who have shown that they recognize themselves in the mirror, because they're the only one who do it, and we put them in a room with a mother and an experimenter, and we, on signal, both mother and experimenter point to the child and say the child's name. And children show, I know that, but you're not going to see this. Yeah, I'm going to show you this one. Here's this boy. He's 15 months. He shows self-recognition. And now the people are calling his name and pointing to them. He's at the door. Now watch this expression. There it is. A perfect scoring of embarrassment. So, 2 points. You can measure these things. And second, that there is a point in normal development when you are the object of attention and you will show embarrassment. Individual differences in how embarrassed you get are very obvious. Some children will start to cry when they become the object of attention. These are the kids who have a terrible, terrible time entering into daycare or nursery and so on. So we're beginning to be able, through emotional behavior, some of these complex behaviors, to be able to sort out individual differences on the basis of emotion, which have important implications, if you like, for their educational experience in preschool classes and so on. So thank you. Let me stop there and allow a few minutes for anything. I think the Tagore Russell is fundamentally innova. There would be very few people who would hold to the position that the infant isn't born and the very young child with an elaborate capacity to react in the world. So I think for the most part there are very few people who would argue there's nothing there and all of it occurs by experience. Even the early analysts understood there were biological differences. So I don't even want to undertake that. The second is there are going to be something which I'm going to call temperament differences, just as a shortcut to your question. Namely, that in these early action patterns, there are individual differences. They can be measured. For example, we, of the many studies using inoculation, well baby inoculation, which all children have to do at 2 months and at 4 months and so on. We go in and we measure cortisol, which is a stress response, and we measure behavior. And we can tell the pediatrician, this is a difficult infant. It's not readily suitable. It is easily aroused and not suitable. And so mom or dad or both, listen, you're going to have trouble soothing this baby. So don't think it's poor parenting, okay? Because individual differences go back to environment. Namely, they're caused by environment. They have an effect environment, they don't. Greenspan's work, I think, is really derivative. And in that sense, trying to intervene, I think there would be methods to intervene, but I'm not at all sure it's at the level of the child rather than the level of the parent. And the perfect example is pain. There are children who respond very different to physical pain. Same physical pain, but they respond differently. Just as there are differences in our group in how painful is it. Some of you will say it's very painful, and some of you will say it's not so painful. And we know that we have no metric to measure the difference. All we can do is if we can intervene and reduce how much pain you said you had on 1 to 10, that's what we use it for. So fundamentally, where the intervention should be is on the part of the parent. Now, interestingly, it was a conversation I had many times with Bowlby in London on the topic of who should we intervene on. And Bowlby tended to agree that the intervention had to be on the parent and not on the child. So I'm not sure how successful we can be moving some of these things on the child. And the example is the one I've given you. If in fact your child is colicky, is not easily soothable, you may not be able to soothe it. Now, there are people who suggest you carry that baby in a sling and you walk around and bounce it, and you will take care of some of the fussiness and crying with colic. Read that literature clearly, because it turns out that you reduce the total minutes of crying, but not the number of crying bouts that occur. Colicky is something in there. There are other things. There's a biological. Sucrose on the tongue is extraordinarily soothing. It's just a biological soother. So if we had good biological soothers, I would certainly think of employing them. But the way I would go into them as a developmental psychologist would be on fixing the environment. Mom, you are not a bad mom. Dad, you're not incompetent. This is a difficult baby. It's going to cry, and you're going to be upset that you can't soothe it. So please don't toss it out the window or throw it against the wall, which unfortunately are consequences that parents get into because it turns out that they are frustrated, embarrassed, that they're poor parenting. So there is an intervention, whether it should be on the child or on the environment. And that's as true for attention deficit. Attention deficit, we give the children drugs in a frequency unheard of in any of our training partners, when in fact we should alter our teaching environment. Because when I would have been classified as hyperactive as a youngster, but I could avoid it because my parents didn't insist that I had to spend an hour in each class, but that I had permission to get up or stand up or walk in place so that I could take care of these activity impulses. So I think the environment becomes easily affected until we have biological agents, which in fact might help us. But certainly the overuse of them is totally uncalled for and not terribly successful. So it's a big question. Sorry.